Amy Swearer from Advancing American Freedom. She's pretty fired up about this, and she joins me on the program to talk about it. Hi, Amy.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say most people don't share the optimistic take that at least we got more justices interested in the originalist text and logic of birthright citizenship. That really isn't, it's not really selling, is it?
Well, so I understand the criticism of it because at the end of the day, it's not a victory. But I do think it's important to keep some perspective on this. Not even a year ago, you had a federal judge echo what I think was the sentiment of even a lot of conservatives on this issue, that to even make this argument about the 14th Amendment was, he said, borderline sanctionable. And now, less than a year later, you have 4 justices actually agreeing with that argument. So I think what this does show is that it's come a long way, especially for an issue that, again, most people, even most scholars, have not really thought about deeply in the past. So I understand that's a bit of a silver lining, but it is still important to understand how far we've come. And I think that bodes well for the future of both the argument and for ways of statutorily or constitutionally sort of overriding or undoing this, because it has the momentum. And you do see from the 4 dissenting justices very, very strong and compelling arguments that I think are going to continue into the future, swaying people on this issue. So I actually tend to disagree. I don't think all is lost. And there still is reason to be optimistic given how far this has come in this short of a time.
Okay. And I appreciate that. And it is status quo. So we didn't, lose anything that wasn't already gone. This is status quo. The problem with this decision, it's an advertisement. It's a massive advertisement to come into the United States and abuse our birthright citizenship elements in the United States. So that's what changed. It was a gigantic global advertisement. But otherwise, functionally nothing changed. So statutorily, this is where I want to mine a little bit deeper. Mm-hmm. And I'm worried because statutorily means you got to change the law. And if you've got to change the law, that requires acting actually like Congress is supposed to and pass new laws or alter old laws. Those immediately go to a court challenge. And the idea is now that the logic is out there, more judges would be amenable to the arguments. But that's, again, pipe dream. I think that's a pipe dream because this Congress and the next Congress and going into the future doesn't seem terribly interested in making laws. They seem a lot more interested in passing omnibus budgets.
Yeah, and that is unfortunate, right? So much of this is going to require the Supreme Court, Congress to act in ways that it has so far, I think, declined to act. I do think, again, some of that they were able to pass the buck in previous times and to say, well, this is up to maybe the Supreme Court will do something. So hopefully this does spur a little bit of momentum and some calls to action now that, they can't pass the buck off to say, well, let's see if the Supreme Court decides, in our favor so that we don't actually have to act on this issue. And I think if ever there were a time for that momentum to start, it's now. So again, I'm not necessarily pessimistic on this, but you're right that there are some statutory things that Congress can do, especially with respect to, for example, just tightening up our immigration laws, our laws surrounding allowing women who we suspect are coming here for birth tourism reasons of coming in, because right now there is actually no law forbidding that. There are some executive orders and some rules in place for these agencies that seek to crack down on that, but Congress can actually step in and make that an official statute. Right.
You have to make it a crime. You have to make
Right.
birth tourism a crime, period. You're right. You can, and we've already heard that there are going to be some tightening of the visa rules. There's going to be pursued. It's going to be considered fraud. That birth tourism itself is going to be looked upon as is a fraud on a visa application. It seems to me that Congress, go ahead, please.
Another thing that gets lost in this is actually looking at what's known as expatriation. This idea that when people who are U.S. citizens go over and partake in the life of another nation, we consider them to have expatriated. That means to have intentionally given up their U.S. citizenship. And there are some legal battles that have to take place with that. Where we start getting into other sorts of legal battles because the Supreme Court in the 1970s sort of made it very difficult to say that someone is expatriated. But I think that's a battle worth pursuing, especially in the case of like birth tourism, where you have individuals who, even if we have to say they were citizens because they were born here, if they continue for the rest of their lives living in and participating in the life of another nation, I think it's worth pursuing statutorily laws that say, at a certain point, we no longer have to consider them citizens because they have abandoned their U.S. citizenship. And so I think there are other ways of pursuing the same ends, even if the Supreme Court has now, I think, very erroneously said we have to consider these individuals citizens.
So that's actually a good thing to think about. And I've never thought about fighting back against the tightening up on expatriation. So that is something you could, but again, Congress could say in order for you to be considered, not to be expatriated. I mean, Congress can actually pass laws on expatriation as well. You have to live here for 15 years or something like that. So, the paying the surrogates to have children that get U.S. passports and then they're taken back to mainland China, that could address that situation. Here's another thing, though. Make it absolutely, and this is a law you can pass, absolutely illegal to contract out for surrogacy to foreign nationals. Just don't allow U.S. citizens to do it. You can just say you're not allowed to do it. Surrogacy is legal. If it's between U.S. citizens, it is not legal to contract out for surrogacy with foreign nationals. So these are but again, legislation versus, having the court just decide narrowly that they wanted to reject an executive order instead of granting everybody under the sun access to our citizenship.
Right. And one more thing to throw out there as well is a lot of people don't realize one of the primary points, especially for Chinese citizens, of taking advantage of birthright citizenship is actually not to fly all the way to mainland United States, but to just fly to Guam. And places that are closer that have lesser visa restrictions necessarily, but that statutorily, for various historical reasons, we consider persons born on those outlying territories to be citizens. The only exception is American Samoa, because, again, historical reasons of how the American Samoans actually are just U.S. nationals. But we could do something similar with respect to those outlying territories, again, just to make it more difficult for persons trying to, take advantage of this ruling to actually, in practice, do so for these nefarious reasons.
Yeah, I think this is ultimately, I know the State Department can tweak visa rules. I know that the U.S. Department of Justice can, concentrate its activities elsewhere. That's one of the things ICE is going to have to start seriously looking at. And of course, the headlines will be miserable on this, but they have to start, finding whether or not the people who are in this country illegally are pregnant and remove them. That's what they're going to have to do.
Right. And again,
and it's going to be an ugly headline. But that is something they're going to have to do.
It is. And that is one of the few things that proponents of universal birthright citizenship cannot get around. Even if, again, as someone who is pro-life, I consider it to be a person in the womb. But when you look at the text of the amendment, it is very specifically persons born in the United States. So unborn children are persons, but they are not citizens of the United States, even under this ruling, until they are born. And so it is an unfortunate headline. In reality, I think you start cracking down on deporting pregnant women. The optics are bad, but when you have an absurd ruling such as this that grants birthright citizenship, and allows the status quo to continue, it leaves the government with few options.
Yep, it's true. And here's another thing: you cut off the welfare spigot. You just simply cut it off. You say, we're no longer going to have a welfare state. We're just not going to permit people who are in this country as asylees or anybody with temporary protected status to be able to access food benefits, Medicaid benefits, et cetera. Period, full stop. And any states that allow it, take away all their money. Let those states fight you, take away the dollars first. But again, that has to be empowered in Congress. And that's something they could do in reconciliation. They can eliminate those dollars in reconciliation because it is 100% tied to a budget issue.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no,
again,
I agree. These are all things to look at.
They got to work at it, though. And in the last, and I will just say, it's sort of since the Mitch McConnell era kicked off, this Congress has gotten very, very comfortable doing very little except omnibus. And continuing resolutions. They love to fight over shutting down the government, omnibus monsters, and continuing resolutions. And that's really not why we're paying people $174,000 a year, plus benefits and travel per diems to, quote, represent us. Advancing American Freedoms, Amy Swearer, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.